Sheriff Andera was not someone who tolerated mistakes. In fact, she was known for her strict adherence to the law and her unparalleled sense of duty. As the head of the Zorathian law enforcement, she was respected and feared across the galaxy. The planet Zorath, where she was from, was a harsh and cold world, and its people were tough, bred for survival in an unforgiving environment. Andera was a living legend in the galaxy, an alien sheriff who had never failed to capture or subdue any criminal in her domain. The Great Galactic Gathering was approaching, a highly anticipated event where leaders from across the universe would meet to discuss peace, trade, and the future of the galaxy. This year, the gathering was especially important. The leaders of several species would finally discuss the rise of a new power, humanity. For centuries, humans were just a small, overlooked species in the grand scheme of things. But in recent years, they had rapidly expanded, forging alliances with other worlds, and their influence was starting to be felt far and wide. Some saw it as a sign of hope, while others viewed it as a threat. Andera was sent on a routine mission, one that took her far from her home planet. Her task was simple: patrol the neutral space zones, areas that were not under the control of any one species. These zones were important for maintaining peace during the approaching meeting. As the sheriff, Andera was skilled at picking up any irregularities, and she knew exactly what to look for. She kept her eyes sharp, scanning the nearby space debris, the stars, and the ships that passed by. It was during one of these patrols that she first saw him. A small human craft, barely visible against the backdrop of the stars, was drifting in the neutral zone. It was alone, out of place, and its engines were sputtering. Andera immediately recognized it as a potential problem. She activated her ship's communication system and called out to the vessel. There was no response. That was strange. Humans were known to be communicative, especially in times of distress. She decided to investigate further. Andera's ship, the Zorathian Sentinel, moved swiftly through space. Its sleek design cut through the stars like a blade, and soon she was close enough to the human ship to make a detailed scan. The readings were odd. There were signs of tampering, as if someone had intentionally disabled the ship's systems. It looked like a trap meant for someone. Then she saw the human. He was alone, standing in the small cockpit of his craft. He appeared confused but calm, his eyes scanning the readouts, unaware that Andera's ship was closing in. Andera wasn't one to take chances. She deployed her ship's tractor beam, slowly pulling the human vessel into her hangar bay. The human didn't seem to react to the pull. He was lost in thought, completely unaware of the danger looming overhead. Once the ship was safely secured, Andera boarded the craft. She was cautious, moving through the small corridors with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. The human was still standing in the cockpit, now turning to face her. He was tall, with dark hair and a calm expression on his face. He looked like any other human she had read about in the intergalactic reports, but there was something about his demeanor that caught her attention. He didn't seem afraid. "You're in my custody now," Andera said, her voice steady and commanding. "Who are you, and what were you doing in this zone?" The human blinked, seemingly surprised by her presence. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, and then he spoke. "My name is John Carter," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I was on a diplomatic mission. My ship, it was sabotage." Andera raised an eyebrow. "A diplomatic mission? That's hard to believe. What species are you working for?" "I'm human," Carter replied, his voice unwavering. "And I'm representing humanity." Andera paused. Humanity. She had heard of them, of course. They were a growing species, making waves across the galaxy. But she didn't believe that a human would be foolish enough to come into this area, unguarded and without proper clearance. Something wasn't adding up. "You're saying you're here for the Great Galactic Gathering?" Andera asked, her tone skeptical. Carter nodded. "Yes. I'm an envoy. But someone is trying to stop humanity from taking part in the gathering. That's why my ship was sabotaged. Andara narrowed her eyes. A human diplomat in the neutral zone, without proper protection. It didn't make sense. She had learned that the human species had come a long way in recent years, overcoming many internal struggles and wars. They were no longer the small, insignificant species they once were, but this was still hard to believe. I don't trust you, Andara said bluntly. But I'll take you to the gathering. The council will decide what to do with you. John Carter didn't flinch. I understand. But if you don't believe me, you need to know this. There are forces working against humanity's place in the galaxy, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to stop us. Andara didn't know what to make of his words, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just captured something far more important than a lone traveler. She had captured the key to a much larger story, and she intended to find out what that story was, no matter what it took. Sheriff Andara was not easily swayed. Her years of service in the Zorathian law enforcement had taught her to rely on facts and logic, not emotional appeals. So when John Carter, the human she had captured, spoke of a larger conspiracy against humanity, she kept a watchful eye on him, but also maintained her professional distance. She brought him aboard the Zorathian Sentinel, her trusted ship. It was sleek and powerful, equipped with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. As she led him through the corridors, she couldn't help but notice how calm he remained, despite the fact that he was in custody. Most prisoners would have been nervous or frightened, but not this human. His steady gaze suggested he had seen much worse than this. Once they reached the ship's holding bay, Andara motioned for him to sit. She remained standing, watching him closely. So, she said, her tone firm but not unkind, you claim to be a diplomat, here for the great galactic gathering. Yet, your ship was sabotaged, and you wandered into the neutral zone alone, without proper clearance. That doesn't add up, Carter. John didn't seem offended by her words. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. I understand your skepticism, he said, but there's more at stake here than you realize. Humanity is being targeted by a group of factions who want to keep us out of the gathering. They fear that we will rise too quickly and disrupt the power balance in the galaxy. Andara studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but there was none. He spoke with conviction, as if he truly believed every word. This only made her more curious. Why would anyone care about humanity's place in the galaxy? She asked. You're a young species, relatively new to the galactic scene. John gave a small wry smile. You'd be surprised. Humans have a way of adapting, of making things work, even when the odds are against us. We may be small in numbers compared to some of the older civilizations, but we're resourceful. We've learned from our mistakes, and we're no longer fighting amongst ourselves like we once did. We're building bridges, making allies. And for some, that's a threat. Andara remained silent for a moment, processing his words. She had heard of humans before. Their history was violent, full of war and chaos. But recently, they had undergone a transformation. It was said that they had found a way to unite, to overcome their internal divisions. She had read reports of their newfound alliances with various species and their rapid expansion in space. But she had never encountered a human diplomat before. This was new to her, and she was unsure of what to make of it. If what you say is true, Andara said at last, then why come here alone? Why risk everything to attend the gathering? John leaned forward, his eyes now focused on hers. Because humanity believes in peace. We believe in diplomacy. We don't want to be seen as a threat. We want to be seen as an ally. But if we don't take this chance, we'll be shut out, and we'll never have the opportunity to prove ourselves. Andara studied him carefully. There was no fear in his voice, no desperation, just a quiet determination. She was still unsure whether she believed his story, but she couldn't deny that there was something different about this human. He wasn't like the others she had encountered. other species that had come to the galaxy with ambitions of conquest or dominance. No, John Carter was something else. His words, his calm demeanor, made her question everything she had believed about humanity. Before she could respond, an alarm blared across the ship. It was a soft, urgent tone that Andera immediately recognized as a security breach. She moved quickly, her instincts kicking in. She tapped a few buttons on the control panel, bringing up the external cameras. A small fleet of ships had appeared on the radar. They were moving swiftly, and their signatures matched those of a known group of rebels, factions that had been actively working against the peace efforts in the galaxy. Andara's heart raced. This was no coincidence. "Looks like your enemies have found us," Andara muttered under her breath, more to herself than to John. John's face remained calm, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "They've come for me," he said. "They'll stop at nothing to prevent humanity from joining the gathering. You need to act fast, Sheriff. If they reach us, we'll never make it to the meeting." Andara didn't need any more convincing. She immediately contacted her ship's control room, issuing commands to prepare for a defense. The Zorathian Sentinel was built for combat, and Andara was a master strategist. She knew how to outmaneuver enemies, especially in neutral zones like this one. The rebel fleet was closing in, but they weren't the only threat. There were unknown forces at play here, forces that were willing to sabotage humanity's future for reasons Andara couldn't yet understand. She had always believed in justice, in the rule of law. But now she was faced with a dilemma. Was humanity truly a force for peace, or was there something more to their rise in the galaxy? As the rebel ships grew closer, Andara turned to John. "Get ready," she said. "We're going to have to fight our way out of this." John nodded, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I'll help you however I can. But we both know that this is bigger than us. It's about the future of the galaxy." Andara met his gaze. For the first time, she wondered if he was right. Maybe humanity was more than just a passing force in the galaxy. Maybe they were the key to something much greater. The battle was about to begin, and Andara knew that the choices she made in the next few moments would shape the future of the galaxy. The rebel ships loomed closer in the cold, dark expanse of space. Andara's fingers danced over the controls of the Zorathian Sentinel, expertly guiding the ship into a defensive position. Her mind was sharp, calculating the best strategy to fend off the incoming threat. Despite the urgency of the situation, she remained calm. She had faced dangers before, but this was different. She was no longer just protecting her own people or the law. Now her decisions affected more than just Zorath. It affected the future of humanity and the galaxy itself. Beside her, John Carter stood silently, watching the approaching fleet. He was no soldier, but his calm presence was almost reassuring. He had insisted on helping, despite Andara's reluctance to involve him further. It was clear that he wasn't afraid, though Andara could sense a certain heaviness in his eyes. He knew what was at stake. If these rebels were able to sabotage the meeting, humanity's place in the galaxy might be lost before it even had a chance to fully develop. Andara glanced at him. "You'd better stay out of the way. This is going to get messy." John gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I won't be much help in a fight, but I can help you think. Sometimes, that's all it takes to win." His words stayed with her for a moment. Andara had always trusted her skills as a strategist, but there was something about John's perspective that made her reconsider. She had grown accustomed to fighting, to using brute force and strength to win battles. But John's approach was different. He was more about outsmarting the enemy than overpowering them. She didn't know yet whether his words held any truth, but she was willing to listen. "All right," she said, making a quick decision. "We'll do this your way." She turned back to the controls, making adjustments to the Zorathian Sentinel's shields. It wasn't a long fight that they would need to win, but a quick, decisive one. The rebel fleet was made up of smaller ships, likely designed for ambush tactics rather than full-scale battles. Andara knew that she could outmaneuver them if she played her cards right. The first rebel ship opened fire, its weapons streaking toward them in bright flashes. Andara quickly activated the ship's defensive systems, the shields flaring to life as the blasts bounced off harmlessly. She didn't return fire immediately, keeping the ship's movements fluid, evasive. She was waiting for the right moment. "I know you want to shoot back," John said, "but sometimes it's better to let them waste their energy first." Andara shot him a glance. "That's what I was planning." She steered the Zorathian sentinel into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding another volley of shots. The rebel ships pursued them, determined to corner the sentinel in the vastness of space. Andara had always been able to calculate the perfect trajectory to avoid such attacks, but now she was paying closer attention to John's words. "I think I've got an idea," John said after a moment. "We need to create a distraction. They're predictable. They'll follow the same path we're taking, trying to close in on us." Andara raised an eyebrow. "A distraction? How do you suppose we do that?" John smiled slightly. "We'll make them think they've cornered us, but then we'll slip away before they know what hit them. We just need a little misdirection." Andara considered his suggestion. It wasn't a typical move she would have made, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. If they could force the rebels into thinking they had trapped them, they could use that moment of false confidence to escape. She nodded. "All right, let's do it your way." With a quick press of a button, Andara activated the ship's decoy systems. Small, holographic projections appeared around the Zorathian sentinel, creating the illusion of multiple ships moving in different directions. The rebel fleet immediately took the bait, their ships splitting off in pursuit of the false targets. John let out a soft breath of relief. Perfect. But the distraction was only the first step. Andara knew that they couldn't just outrun the rebels. They had to turn the tables on them completely. She powered up the Zorathian sentinel's weapons, preparing for the moment when the rebels would realize they had been fooled. "They're coming back," Andara said, her voice low. "But they won't be expecting this." The moment the rebel ships started to regroup, Andara slammed the sentinel into high speed, shooting toward the heart of the rebel fleet. It was a risky move, but it caught the rebels off guard. Before they could react, Andara fired the sentinel's plasma cannons, disabling the lid ship with one powerful blast. John winced as the ship rocked from the blast, but he stayed focused. "Nice shot." Andara didn't take her eyes off the screen. "We're not done yet." The remaining rebel ships scattered, realizing too late that they had underestimated the Zorathian sentinel. Andara and John used the chaos to their advantage, outmaneuvering the enemy ships, forcing them to retreat. Once the last rebel ship had fled, Andara took a deep breath and released the tension in her shoulders. She had won the battle, but more importantly, she had gained something she hadn't expected: trust. She had trusted John Carter's plan, and it had worked. It was an alliance she hadn't seen coming, but one that might prove invaluable as they moved forward. As the sentinel floated in the silence of space, Andara glanced at John, who was already back at his station, looking at her with a quiet smile. "We make a good team." Andara's lips twitched into a small smile, the first one she had given since their journey began. "We'll see. But for now, we need to make sure humanity gets to the gathering. We still have a long way to go." John nodded. "Then let's get moving." Andara set a course for the great galactic gathering, her mind focused and her resolve stronger than ever. She had learned something crucial today. Sometimes, the most unlikely alliances were the ones that made all the difference, and with John Carter by her side, maybe humanity's future wasn't as uncertain as it had once seemed. The Zorathian sentinel cruised through space, its engines humming steadily as Andara and John Carter made their way to the great galactic gathering. The battle with the rebel fleet had left both of them exhausted, but their victory had also given them a renewed sense of determination. For the first time since their journey began, Andara allowed herself a brief moment of calm. She couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something was still off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. John, sitting at the controls next to her, seemed lost in thought. He had been quieter than usual since their escape from the rebels. His calm demeanor had always been a constant, but now there was a subtle tension in the air between them. Andara noticed it, but she wasn't sure how to address it. They were allies, but she had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile thing, especially in the middle of a journey like this. As the vast stretches of space unfolded before them, Andara couldn't help but wonder if humanity's rise in the galaxy was as peaceful as John claimed. The rebel attack was just one sign that there were forces out there determined to stop them. But who were these forces, and why had they chosen to sabotage the great galactic gathering? Andara couldn't help but feel that she was on the edge of a much larger conspiracy, one that involved more than just a few rogue factions. Without warning, the ship's console beeped urgently, breaking the silence between them. Andara's eyes snapped to the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the readings. "We've been followed," she muttered under her breath. John looked up from his station, his face expressionless. "How many?" "Too many to fight head-on," Andara replied. She analyzed the data quickly, her mind racing. The readings didn't match any known fleet. The ships were smaller, faster, and they were closing in fast. They were being stalked, carefully, methodically. "Can we outrun them?" John asked. Andara shook her head. "Not if they know we're heading toward the gathering. They'll cut off all our escape routes." John didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he stood and moved closer to the control panel, his brow furrowed in thought. Andara had grown used to his silence in moments of tension. He was thinking. She could see the gears turning in his mind, but what exactly was he planning? "I think we have to outsmart them, again," John said quietly. "But this time, we won't be running." Andara raised an eyebrow. "Go on." John took a deep breath, then met her gaze. "We need to bait them. They're clearly after me, not the ship. They won't expect us to put ourselves in a position where they have to make a choice, whether to follow us into dangerous territory or risk losing us altogether." Andara's instincts told her this wasn't a good idea. Baiting an unknown enemy could have disastrous consequences. But John's expression was focused, his calm confidence hard to ignore. "You want us to lead them into a trap?" she asked. John nodded. "Exactly. We'll steer them toward the asteroid field near the gathering. It's a maze of debris, dangerous for anyone who doesn't know how to navigate it. But we do. If we can get them to follow us, we can use the terrain to our advantage and take them out one by one." Andara weighed the options in her mind. It was risky. But if they didn't take action, they'd be caught in the open, vulnerable to whatever force was chasing them. And if John's theory was correct, that these pursuers were after him, it would make sense to lead them into a place where they couldn't be easily tracked. Still, Andara had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and something about John's plan felt too simple. She glanced at the screen again. The enemy ships were drawing closer. "I don't like it," Andara admitted. "But we don't have time to think of another plan. Let's do it." John flashed a quick grin. "I knew you'd come around." With a series of calculated movements, Andara veered the Sentinel toward the asteroid field, her hand steady on the controls. The asteroid field was dense and treacherous, but Andara had navigated it countless times. The rebels wouldn't know the terrain as well. It was a perfect place for an ambush. As they entered the field, the enemy ships followed, just as John had predicted. Their ships were agile, but they lacked the precision needed to navigate the maze of asteroids without making a mistake. The Zorathian Sentinel was faster, but it wasn't as nimble as the smaller rebel vessels. It would be a battle of endurance, who could outlast whom in the ever-changing labyrinth of rock and debris. Andara's heart raced as she led them deeper into the asteroid field. The rocks around them seemed to pulse with danger, but she focused on keeping the ship steady. It wasn't long before the first rebel ship made a costly error. A ship misjudged its turn, clipping an asteroid and sending debris scattering through space. Andara saw an opportunity. Now, she whispered to herself, tapping a few commands on her control panel. She fired a few precision shots at the enemy, disabling their navigation systems. One ship fell behind, and the others hesitated. "Nice work," John said, his voice calm, though there was a hint of excitement in it. "Now we're cooking." Andara didn't take her eyes off the screen. They were far from safe. More enemy ships were closing in, but they were starting to panic. The asteroid field had turned into their greatest ally. One by one, the rebel ships made mistakes, crashing into asteroids or getting caught in the field's unpredictable gravitational pull. But as Andara focused on their victory, a sudden flash of betrayal caught her off guard. One of the ships, the smallest one, the one that had lagged behind, pulled a sudden maneuver. It wasn't following the others anymore. It was heading straight for the Zorathian Sentinel, its weapons powering up. "No," Andara muttered under her breath. She could hardly believe it. The small ship had been a decoy. While the other rebels were distracted, this ship had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. John's face paled as he saw the ship's weapons aimed directly at them. It's a trap. The true fight had only just begun. The small rebel ship darted toward the Zorathian Sentinel, its weapons charged and ready. The surprise attack came too quickly for Andara to react. She had been so focused on the rest of the enemy fleet, using the asteroid field to her advantage, that she didn't see this betrayal coming. The small ship had lagged behind, pretending to be part of the scattered rebel fleet. And now, it was moving in for the kill. Andara's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively swung the Sentinel into a sharp, evasive turn. The ship lurched, but the rebel ship was fast, cutting off their escape routes. The weapons fire from the smaller vessel shot past them, grazing the Sentinel's hull. It wasn't a direct hit, but the energy surge sent a tremor through the ship, throwing Andara off balance. "Hold on," Andara shouted as she fought to regain control of the Sentinel. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was no longer just a fight for survival. Someone, possibly even someone on the inside, had turned against them. John's voice came from behind her, calm but urgent. "We need to disable their weapons. Andara, they're too close now." Andara's mind raced. She didn't want to waste time. The small rebel ship was getting too close, and it was clear that their plan was to disable the Sentinel and force them into a corner. She couldn't let that happen. She flicked a switch, activating the ship's countermeasures, and watched as the small, fast rebel ship fired again. But this time, the Zorathian Sentinel was ready. Andara used the ship's advanced shielding to redirect the energy blast, deflecting it just enough that it didn't hit any vital systems. The ship shook, but it held steady. "That's it. Now's our chance," Andara called out to John. John was already at the weapons station, his hands flying across the controls. The Sentinel's plasma cannons hummed to life. Andara could feel the tension building between them. They had to act quickly. If they didn't disable the rebel ship now, they would be trapped. Andara took a deep breath and slammed the ship into a sharp right turn, positioning them just behind the small rebel vessel. It was risky, but it was their only shot. The Sentinel had more firepower, and Andara knew how to use it. "Fire," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The plasma blast shot forward, hitting the rebel ship's engines with precision. The smaller vessel immediately shuddered, its propulsion systems failing. It began to drift, helpless in space. "We've got them," John said, a note of triumph in his voice. But Andara knew better. They weren't out of danger yet. The other rebel ships, still caught in the asteroid field, hadn't noticed the sudden shift in the battle. But they would soon. Andara quickly scanned the remaining enemy vessels. The odds were still not in their favor. "Let's finish this," Andara muttered to herself. She turned the ship toward the remaining rebel fleet, the Zorathian Sentinel's engines roaring as it sped toward the heart of the enemy. But before they could make their move, an unexpected signal flashed across the ship's comm system. Andara froze. It was a distress signal, a message from one of the rebel ships. "Wait, what's this?" she murmured, pressing a few buttons to enhance the signal. The voice that came through the speaker was unfamiliar, but carried a sense of urgency. "Sheriff Andara, if you can hear me, you need to stop. We know you're close, but you're walking right into a trap. The one who led you into the asteroid field. It's a setup. There are more ships waiting for you at the gathering. They're already in position." Andara's eyes widened. She quickly turned to John. "This is a trap. They knew we would get here. Who's pulling the strings?" John's face grew pale as he absorbed the information. The rebel ships. They were never the real threat. Someone else is behind this. Someone who wants to stop humanity from joining the gathering. Andara's grip tightened on the controls. This was worse than she had thought. The rebels were only pawns in a much larger game. She had to think quickly. Time was running out. John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but resolute. "We have to warn the others. We can't let them fall into the same trap. We still have a chance." Andara hesitated. There was so much at stake, and she knew that whatever they did next would determine not only her fate, but the fate of humanity's future in the galaxy. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She punched in the coordinates for the Great Galactic Gathering, setting course for the rendezvous point. But her mind was spinning. Who had orchestrated this elaborate betrayal? And how could she possibly stop it in time? As they approached the gathering site, the ship's sensors began to pick up a growing number of unidentified vessels. They were moving into position, blocking off the way to the meeting. Andara's pulse quickened. The message was clear. They were being hunted. "We don't have much time," Andara said, her voice tight with determination. "Prepare for anything, John. This isn't over." John nodded, his expression hardening. "I know. Let's show them that humanity doesn't back down." As the Zorathian sentinel drew closer to the gathering's location, Andara's thoughts raced. She had always believed in the power of diplomacy, in the potential for peace in the galaxy. But now, she realized that peace was a fragile thing, easily shattered by those who didn't want to see it succeed. Andara had fought for justice her entire life, but this was something different. This wasn't just a battle between armies. It was a battle for the very future of the galaxy. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her. The Zorathian sentinel hurtled toward the Great Galactic Gathering, its engines roaring through space. Andara's mind raced, each thought more urgent than the last. The distress signal had been clear. The rebels weren't the true threat. Someone else was orchestrating the attack. But who? And why now? She had to find out before it was too late. John stood beside her, his face set with determination. "We can't just rush in. If they've been waiting for us, they're ready for any move we make." "I know," Andara replied, her fingers tapping nervously on the control panel. She had always been able to outthink her enemies, to stay one step ahead. But this time, the pieces weren't fitting together. They were walking into a trap, and it felt like they were being herded into a corner. "We need to be smarter about this," John said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "We can't play by their rules. We need to turn the tables." Andara nodded. It was true. If they kept following the enemy's plan, they'd lose. But if they could find a way to disrupt the trap, they might still have a chance. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "We'll go in low. They'll be expecting us to approach head-on. But if we slip in from below, we might catch them off guard." John raised an eyebrow. "Underneath the gathering. That's bold." "It's the only option we have," Andara replied firmly. She knew it wasn't the safest plan, but it was the one that offered the best chance of success. They had no other choice but to take risks now. As the Zorathian sentinel changed course, moving into position beneath the gathering's massive space station, Andara kept a careful eye on the sensors. The enemy ships were still in place, waiting for the Sentinel to make its move. They hadn't noticed the shift in trajectory yet, but it wouldn't be long before they realized what was happening. John studied the map of the area, tapping his fingers on the console. If we can get in close enough, we can disable their ships from behind. That'll throw them off balance long enough to get to the meeting spot. Andara's eyes narrowed as she thought about the next steps. What if they've already disabled the meeting site's defenses? If they've had this planned for a while, it's possible we'll walk into a trap inside the station too. John nodded grimly. It's a risk, but we can't afford to back down now. Humanity needs to make its place in the galaxy, and we can't let anyone take that from us. Andara felt a weight settle over her chest. They were moving into the heart of enemy territory, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet there was no turning back. They had to finish this, no matter what the cost. The Zorethian Sentinel approached the massive space station. The silence of the void surrounding them made the tension even more unbearable. They were now only minutes away from reaching the meeting site. Andara's hands gripped the controls tightly as she adjusted the ship's speed, slowing to avoid detection. The shadows of the station's massive hull loomed ahead, blocking them from view. But as they neared the station, Andara's senses began to tingle with unease. There was something wrong. A faint pulse of energy registered on her radar. It was small at first, but growing larger, quickly closing in on their position. "Damn it," Andara muttered, her eyes darting across the sensors. "They're closing in on us." John turned toward her. "What's happening?" "They're waiting for us," Andara said, her voice low. "They knew we'd try to sneak in. They've already locked down the area." The enemy was closer now. 2 enemy ships had broken off from the rest and were flying in an intercept course. It was clear they were waiting for the moment when the Zorethian Sentinel would have no choice but to make its move. The game had changed. Andara had to act quickly. "We have to break through them," John said, his voice filled with resolve. "We can't stop now." Andara nodded. "Hold on tight." She slammed the Sentinel's thrusters to full power, rocketing forward with a burst of speed. The 2 enemy ships fired upon them, their weapons blasting toward the Zorethian Sentinel. Andara weaved and dodged, guiding the ship expertly through the incoming fire. John moved to the weapon station, firing back at the enemies. Their shields flared as his shots hit their targets. "You've got them," Andara shouted, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. But the enemy ships were not retreating. They were relentless. One of the rebel ships veered to the side, trying to flank them. But Andara had already predicted this. She activated the Sentinel's evasive thrusters and spun the ship sharply, throwing off the enemy's aim. With a sudden burst of plasma fire, they disabled the first ship, sending it drifting away in space. "That's one down," John said, his voice steady despite the chaos. But there was no time to celebrate. The second rebel ship was still on their tail, firing relentlessly. Andara tightened her grip on the controls, her mind focused solely on the battle. She knew the only way to survive now was to end it quickly. They couldn't afford to be distracted. They needed to reach the meeting spot. The Zorethian Sentinel twisted and turned, outmaneuvering the enemy ship at every turn. Then, Andara saw it, the moment she had been waiting for. The perfect angle. She slammed the Sentinel into a sharp climb, firing a blast directly at the rebel ship's engine. The explosion rocked the ship, sending the last of their pursuers into retreat. Andara exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her shoulders. "We did it," she said, her voice quieter now. The immediate danger had passed, but there was still so much ahead. John's smile was small but sincere. "We're not done yet, but we're closer than ever." Andara nodded. The Zorethian Sentinel was battered but intact. They had made it through the worst of it. But they still had one final goal: to reach the great galactic gathering and expose the truth behind the betrayal. It was time to face the forces behind the plot and ensure humanity's place in the galaxy. "Let's go," Andara said, setting their course for the meeting. The real fight starts now. The Zorathian sentinel glided through the void, its engines humming softly as Andara and John neared the great galactic gathering. The battle had been fierce, but now the space station loomed before them. Andara knew that this was it, the final step, the place where the future of humanity would either be secured or shattered. As they approached the gathering, the immense size of the station filled the viewport. Thousands of ships surrounded it, representatives from countless civilizations, all gathering to discuss the fate of the galaxy. But Andara couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The ships in orbit, the preparations for the meeting, it all felt off. John stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the station. "We're almost there, but I still don't understand who's behind all of this. Why go to such lengths to sabotage humanity's entrance into the gathering?" Andara glanced at him, her expression grim. "I don't know, but I'm certain we'll find the answers soon enough. Whoever is behind this is playing a dangerous game, and we have to stop them." The Sentinel slowly entered the station's docking bay. As the ship touched down, Andara's heart raced. The doors to the hangar opened, revealing the bustling interior of the station. The air was filled with the hum of technology and the voices of the various species that had arrived for the gathering. Yet despite the outward bustle of the station, there was a tense undercurrent. Andara could feel it in the pit of her stomach. John moved toward the door. "Let's not waste any time. We need to find out who's behind all of this and expose them before they can strike again." Andara nodded, following him. They walked down the long corridor of the station, the metallic walls glinting in the artificial light. The deeper they went, the more the feeling of unease grew. It was too quiet. No one seemed to be in a hurry. No one was paying them much attention. It almost felt like they were being watched. As they reached the central chamber, Andara's eyes scanned the room. There were dozens of delegates, most of them gathered around a holographic display. The council was in session. Andara and John approached a terminal, trying to blend in with the crowd. Andara's gaze quickly shifted from the delegates to the overhead screens. The images on the holograms began to shift, showing various parts of the galaxy. But then, without warning, one of the images shifted to a darker, more sinister one. It was a rebel base, deep in the heart of enemy territory. Andara froze. The rebel ships she had fought earlier were stationed there, but something about the image didn't sit right. Before she could react, a voice echoed throughout the chamber. "Attention, delegates. Sheriff Andara has arrived." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, their eyes filled with curiosity and suspicion. Andara held her ground, standing tall as the delegates murmured among themselves. The voice continued, "Sheriff Andara, we've been expecting you. You've done well to make it this far, but your journey ends here." Andara's heart sank. The voice had been cold and familiar. It was the same voice from the distress signal. Whoever was behind this knew exactly who she was, and now they were about to reveal themselves. "Who are you?" Andara demanded, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of the moment. A figure stepped out from the shadows, walking toward the center of the room. It was a humanoid being with a sleek black suit and a helmet that hid their face. As the figure approached, the helmet slowly lifted, revealing a face that Andara had seen only in fleeting moments, a face from her past. "Do you remember me, Sheriff?" the figure said, their voice laced with a hint of amusement. Andara's mind raced. She had seen this person before, but where? The memory was just out of reach. "I don't have time for games," Andara said, her voice sharp. "What is this all about? Why try to stop humanity from joining the gathering?" The figure's lips curled into a smile. "It's simple, really. The galaxy is better off without humanity. You think your species is special, that you deserve a place here, but you're nothing more than a threat to the delicate balance we've worked so hard to create. Your arrival in the galactic community will disrupt everything." John stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're wrong. Humanity isn't here to disrupt. We want peace, cooperation, a future for everyone. The figures shook their head. Peace, cooperation. Those are just words. You're not ready for that kind of responsibility. And we can't let you prove us wrong. Andara's fists clenched. So, you're behind all of this. The rebels, the traps, everything. The figure nodded, their smile widening. It's all part of the plan. And now, Sheriff, it's too late to stop us. Before Andara could react, the station's lights flickered. The screens began to display erratic images, and alarms started blaring. The figure had activated a system that sent the entire station into lockdown. Now you understand, the figure said. You've walked right into our trap. The great galactic gathering will be no more, and humanity will be kept out. Forever. Andara and John exchanged a glance. They had been played, but they weren't ready to give up. There was too much at stake now. We'll see about that, Andara said, her voice filled with determination. John nodded. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The figure looked at them, a cruel laugh escaping from their lips. You can try, but it won't matter. You've lost. But Andara was already moving. She knew what had to be done. They wouldn't just sit back and accept defeat. Humanity had come too far to be turned away now. With one last look at John, she nodded. Let's finish this, Andara said. The final fight for the future of the galaxy had just begun. As the lights flickered again, Andara and John moved toward the heart of the station, determined to stop the traitor and secure humanity's place in the stars. The galaxy was watching, and they would not fail.